Are we okay? Okay.
I hope so.
All right, well, welcome everybody to our August meeting. We all know that we skipped July. I think everybody was really busy with both work and play things. So it's nice to take a month off, I think, and catch up a little bit. So I see a lot of new faces in the room and some regular faces. So let's just do some quick introductions. If you'll just say your name and your organization. My name's Tara Tui. I manage the Utah Broadband Project and work here in the Governor's Office of Economic Development.
John Harvey. I'm a staff with the Utah Public Service Commission, and we are involved with the Broadband Project as well.
Lynn Yoakum with Utah Department of Transportation. I manage all the fiber optics and communications.
Mike, founder of US Ignite,
Dave Ryan with Strata Networks, service provider in the basement.
Jeff Goodrich, also with Strata.
And Donna Jones-Morris with the State Library, and I have to give a small plug for their area, if it's okay. I also went to the opening just a few days ago of the new Vernal Public Library, which is Uinta County Library, and it is definitely a 21st century library and very connected and really impressive facility. Small plug.
Yay, good job.
For your area.
I'm Christy Heaton at the AGRC.
Sean Fernandez with the AGRC also. I manage the cadastral group.
I'm Don Albert with Western Rural Development.
Utah Education Network. David Gray with Science Application International Corporation.
Bill Harry, Salt Lake Valley Emergency Communications Center and Utah 911 Committee.
Dane Cox, Washington County Administrator and Utah 911 Committee.
Kevin Rose, the statewide runner-up of the Executive Committee. Also, Kim Peterson and Mark Van Orden have a completely meeting.
Proctor with UCAN, we do the
Todd Marriott, Utopia, Utah Infrastructure Agency.
Kelly Cole, Utah Broadband Project.
Roger Timmerman, Utopia.
Maybe let's just go that way then.
Eric Heisen, CenturyLink.
Ed Narano with Confederate Tribes of Goshen.
Walker with Enterprise Technologies.
Bert Granberg with the Automated Geographic Reference Center. I'm the mapping lead on the broadband project.
Steve Taylor.
Bill Mesa, I'm with Hewlett Packard.
Diane Bradshaw with Direct Communications and Services.
Parker from the Utah Division of Public Utilities.
Lowry.
Lowry Snow, Utah House of Representatives.
Great, we have a great group today. Thanks everyone for coming. So let's get started with our agenda today. I put a flyer over on the table. I put it out a little late, so I hope you all got a copy of it. I wanted to turn some time over to Sabrina Scott with the Utah Education Network to talk about an E-rate training seminar that we'll be hosting at GoEd on August 28th. Yeah, you should be up at the table. Come on.
I'm up here.
Even a microphone.
I assume the green light means on. Just very quickly, I just wanted to mention the seminar that we have planned for August 28th here, not necessarily in this room, but
in this room.
In this room. I don't think we distributed an outline. I just updated an outline yesterday. I'll just very quickly go over that so you know what to expect on the 28th if you plan to attend or if you would like to attend, if any of these things are of interest to you. Again, this is dedicated to service provider E-rate training orientation, if you will. During the seminar, we'll spend a little time on the USAC Schools and Libraries website, just orienting anyone who's not familiar with that website. Show you how applicants and vendors do online filing. discuss priority 1 E-rate funding versus priority 2 E-rate funding and implications thereof. How vendors can assist E-rate applicants, schools and libraries, when they are procuring new services, or maybe they're not procuring new services, but they need to. Talk about the 5 E's of E-rate. I'll just leave that at that, leave that there, so you can come to the seminar and find out what that means. Talk about applicant processes and timelines, as many of you who do participate with applicants in E-rate, you know that right now is we're prep time for the upcoming funding year 2013, which begins next July 1. Talk about state master contracts and how they are useful for E-rate procurement and applicants and applications. Mention our data collection issues and timelines again. We're required to collect data every year for enrollment in SLP from the schools. In addition to service-related information. The filing window, we'll talk about that a little bit and how that's expected to be January through March again now. Invoicing options, I think that's of importance to everyone because that's the bottom line. That's how we realize the E-rate discount, how applicants realize the E-rate discount, and talk about how vendors can assist in that process, maybe improve the invoicing for everyone involved. We'll mention gotchas along the way as well. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about policy, see where that stands at the moment, because it's continuously fluctuating form issues around USF. We know that FCC is still undergoing Connect America reforms, USF reforms. We expect E-rate to also undergo some reforms once Connect America is settled. Talk about changes in the marketplace and what kind of new services might be available or applicants would expect. And maybe talk about some of the most difficult to solve issues that remain for us, for UEN, for the service providers, and for schools and libraries in the state. That's all I have to say today.
Thank you, Sabrina. And Sabrina has generously offered to lead this seminar. We're just hosting it here at GoEd. And I did want to give a special thanks to Americom, who has agreed to provide the lunch. I actually met Americom through a business familiarization meeting that we hosted here at GoEd, and maybe they could say a few things about their business and what they do.
Americom, we're a full-service provider as far as placement of quite a bit. We have maintenance there. We have inside wiring and cabling as well. Full gamut of fiber.
Great. Well, we appreciate having you here. So you can, the instructions for registration for that meeting are on this flyer, or you can go to our website under the events section. That will link you to the registration as well. We do have a limited number of spots. They're about half full right now. So if you know people that should be there from your organizations or you'd like to attend, please go and register. And for the people we really want to be there, you'll be getting a phone call. Okay, so next up on our agenda is establishing an executive committee. So we have been meeting for just over a year now. We've released our first report, and we thought that it was time to focus on recommendations of that report. And to do that, we would like to establish an executive committee to help lead those actions and the council moving forward. So this form was on the table. I hope you all received it. If you'd like to fill it out today and leave it with me, you're more than welcome to do that. If not, I ask that you email your nominations or recommendations to me by September 1st. And the responsibilities and duties of the executive committee will be to set action items, to advocate and to discuss outreach strategies for partnerships and membership, creating and approving working groups and subcommittees, approving working group proposals for the council to develop and work on developing content and approving meeting agendas, and then other items that might come up through the council or through the broadband project staff. So I ask that everybody take a look at this, think about it, and then let me know. You can also recommend yourself. I hope that everybody takes a look at it. It would really help us out. Speaking of the direction of the council, we also would like to move that we now have these meetings on a bi-monthly basis, so every other month or as needed more frequently. We think that having the meetings every other month will sufficiently cover our bases. During the first year, it was important that we met once a month. If there's any discussion on that item, any thoughts? Okay, I thought so. We will have in the off months, the executive committee meet via phone or web conference to discuss agenda and action items, or that off month will also be used for working group meetings as established by the executive committee. I'm glad that nobody has a problem with that. So the last thing I wanted to discuss before we move on to presentations is future items for council discussion. Before we pass the future agenda items off to the executive council, I wanted to bring it up to this group to see if anybody had suggestions or recommendations for items that we should be considering in the next, in the immediate or future. Yeah, Steve.
I think the number one thing that safety will be whatever they do with FirstNet, the nationwide broadband development. The members of that board should be announced next week. It has to be stood up by the 20th of August, so we should have further information, but that should be a huge issue, not only here, but nationwide.
Okay.
Tara, the ongoing funding issue for
Thanks for bringing that up. I didn't even plant that question.
we could have Lowry, you know. Important work.
And you know, to add to that point, I think you all know, or maybe for those who are new to this group, this is not a statutory body. This is an initiative of GOED that this council meets through the Utah Broadband Project grant that is actually administered by the Public Service Commission through the NTIA. So we are fully funded through the end of 2014, and after that we have zero funding. So if this is something that members feel is important to continue, we will be asking for support, possibly legislative support, in probably the near future to establish this council as a statutory body before we have to ask for funding. And what? Oh, yeah, I should thank you all for volunteering for free, because I don't think that's something that we'll ask for as membership salary.
What type of a budget are you looking at there for annual cost?
You know, to be honest, the budget that we have for these meetings it's very limited. It's basically limited to refreshments, costs for staff time, and printing. It's very limited. I think what will be more expensive than the planning work that we do is continuing the mapping effort as a state. The data collection, the verification, the ongoing activities on that front, I think, are the more costly portion of the proposal. But to be able to do what we do, we need the mapping to be able to inform the planning decisions. So they might be two separate components, but it's something to think about. Okay, other issues. Yeah, okay, well, if anybody has any other issues, please just send them via email or nominate yourself to be on the executive committee.
I might throw out maybe one or two other
Go ahead.
Just for future. Once this grant activity is done, we kind of have rails that we're playing in surrounded by the mapping project, right? But This group here, I think there's some other issues that we can help tackle. One would be one of adoption. How do we become a smarter and more literate state in the use of broadband to enhance our quality of life, improve business, those kinds of things. That's not currently under the charter. I don't believe that we have. And looking at our coverage, we're a pretty well covered state. There are pockets that have real issues. But adoption is probably our next biggest hurdle. So that would be an ongoing activity. I'd like to see us maybe try to assist and help tackle. And then the other one is one of becoming a digital citizen and how to protect and secure your life. One of awareness of what that means. And there may be other venues to do that in, but those are two things that I think be tackled by an ongoing effort once funding is established. And perhaps funding could even come out of some of our revamp or some of the USF stuff, because it is a small piece, but it's a very important piece that helps all the carriers that are here and all of our citizenry. Don't have any answers, just a couple of them.
Okay. Yeah, Don.
We've got a great network with our libraries and with UEN, that the public can completely access, and there's some real opportunity we have to be very unique and pick content from Utah State, right?
Yeah, we're working with these things.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
But I would concur that adoption is still a very big issue for libraries, for schools, for cities, for everybody. I think all of us have things to learn about how we can employ this to help maximize business, help maximize everything that's happening, and help the people who are providing it understand the potential, because many of them who are providing it don't even know all the options of how it can be used. So I know that we have a lot of librarians, including myself probably, who could learn a lot about all the ways we could use this to help our customers.
I think that when we talk about these issues, though, and look at this forward thinking, it'd be interesting to get from the governor and the state's perspective, kind of some long-range goals and plans. Where as a state, what is our broadband plan? I think sometimes I'm concerned about topology when we talk about these kinds of applications, and I don't think we ever address topology concerns and issues. So I think that those are topics that would be interesting.
I think that Utah also has some unfair advantages in deploying possible on. You've got to be thinking about how to take advantage of that.
I like that thought.
Glenn, do you want to enumerate at all? Just a little overview.
We were here in June, something about US Ignite, which I found. Actually, my home state.
Thoughts, suggestions? Okay. Sounds like we've still got a lot of things to move forward on. Just in terms of other discussion items, I know many people attended the USF hearing yesterday, and John Harvey will be talking more about what's been happening at the Public Service Commission. But I just, for those of you who weren't there, wanted to alert you to pay attention to what's happening with the state Universal Service Fund. I think it's going to be a transition for the state that we really need to take on and take leadership on, in that as we move from supporting traditional voice services and to supporting broadband services, we need to, encourage and help educate our legislators and state officials about why that's important, about what other states are doing, and about what our providers have been able to do using universal service in their own operations that has made us, a leader in telecom. Lowry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder what your thoughts were on the hearing yesterday, if you thought that the committee really understood the issue at hand.
That's a good question. Actually, Tara, this was the second time that the House Committee on Public Utilities and Technology heard. I think it was better received this time than the first time because part of the objective is to educate the members of fairly technical issues. And at the conclusion of the hearing yesterday on the issue, one of the representatives that was seated next said to me, "Boy, Larry, I'm glad you understand this because I don't get any of this." But I don't think that's true of everyone. Spencer Cox was there and did a great job in his presentation. And Ted Boyer, representing the Public Service Commission, followed up. And I think that they grasped the significance of the fact that with this change in the reallocation of the funding, that the state's going to have to step up for rural Utah. I think that message came across. The question I put to Spencer during the hearing and near the end of his presentation was, what is the worst case scenario if the state were not to step up and assist? Clearly there are implications that's going to affect or would affect the operations and broadband in respect to expansion, but also with respect to ongoing services. So I certainly understood the issue, and I think many did. Leadership of the committee understood the issue, and I could tell that by the questions that they were posed. And I think Representative Noel, who was chairing that, said that we would be hearing on this same issue before we get back into session again. So 3 times will probably do the trick. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much. Eric also testified, so did Kira. Do you guys have any thoughts about the hearing or the issue moving forward?
They did, and I should did a great job as well. I apologize. I was cued in a little more to the answer maybe representing actually rural Utah. I apologize. CenturyLink is clearly. Actually, they didn't give you enough time, did they?
I think everybody was ready to leave, so I shortened the presentation. But
we learned a lot about integrated resource plans.
Clearly, it will be an ongoing effort, and I think much is left to be determined. And I know John is going to talk a little bit about the Connect America Fund.
Well, we'll address whatever anybody wants me to address. That's the question.
I don't really have anything to
I'm going to add one other comment. When Representative Lauer was talking about the committee members, I'm sure that there were some who have some personal experience that maybe understand the issue. I think that there were 2 key members of the committee that did participate. There was an American Legislative Exchange Council and Fred Adams, who's the Senate chair, moderated a panel discussion on rural broadband issues. There were other legislators in attendance in that. One of the other panelists, Bob Okerlund, also attended that meeting.
well, we'll keep watching that and monitoring that as a council. I would just urge the members to stay involved and to have your voices heard with the committee. Any other discussion items or announcements anybody would like to make?
Remember, visions without capital are nightmares.
We
We gotta figure out how to fund this effort going long term. So that's probably the biggest elephant on the list, I think.
Thank you.
Regardless of the discipline.
Okay, so let's get started with our first presentation from Kevin Rose. For those of you who don't know Kevin, he's a statewide interoperability coordinator, and he works at the Department of Technology Services. So, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate the invitation to come and talk about this. I think this is an issue that going to impact this council at some point. So appreciate the opportunity to come and maybe help educate a little bit.
Want a clicker for
Yeah, that'd be great if you do. As Sarah said, I'm the statewide interoperability coordinator, and I'm the liaison to the statewide interoperability executive committee. We're charged with facilitating and assisting public safety organizations achieving data and voice communications interoperability. We were first stood up. We had some federal grant funds that we used to help facilitate those activities. Those are starting to dry up a little bit, so the comment about the vision without capital is a nightmare. It's definitely starting to ring true a little bit. For those of you who don't know what's going on with the Public Safety Broadband Network, I just want to give you a high-level overview of what's happened, what it is, and what's going on, and then explain to you what the SIEC is doing to prepare for it. So the question is, what is it? Back in February, President Obama signed the Job Creation Act of 2012. Part of that legislation included funding and direction for the creation of a nationwide public safety broadband network. Part of the legislation also created an independent federal agency underneath NTIA that will administer the network and will move forward with the construction of the network. This organization is called FirstNet. As Steve mentioned earlier, that this body will be guided by an executive board that's supposed to be comprised of members from public safety agencies representing urban, rural, and having also some technical specialties with wireless broadband communications. This board is supposed to be stood up on the 20th, so we're expecting the announcement of who those members are here soon. Also, the legislation allocated 20 megahertz of spectrum to FirstNet, gives them the sole licensure for that, which included the D block, if you're familiar with that whole deal that's been a debate going on for years and years. So we did finally get that D block allocated to public safety. The legislation allocated $7 billion, which will come from FCC auctions of spectrum, and that's what's going to fund that $7 billion. $2 billion of that money will be FirstNet will be able to borrow, and then once they finish their spectrum auction, they'll get the rest of the $7 million to $5 million to continue their construction. They also allocated $135 million for local state planning grants. They're going to be releasing the grant guidance on that on the 22nd, so we'll be able to see exactly what our activities that we can fund with that and how to move forward. The goal in that is to allow states to prepare and plan for the implementation of the network in their state. Also to gather information as far as existing infrastructure that will be available to FirstNet as they prepare an RFP to construct the network. FirstNet, once they get established, they're going to be charged with creating and completing an RFP for the construction of the networks nationwide. Once they get that RFP completed, they're going to present that to each state's governor. The governor, once he receives that plan, has 90 days to decide whether or not he wants to participate with FirstNet's plan for the state, or if he wants to opt out, as they're calling it. Opting out, there's been a whole lot of debate about what that is and what that means. basically, once the governor decides, you know what, this plan doesn't work for my state, we want to do our own, then he can notify FirstNet that the state has the intentions to opt out. Once he does that, he has 180 days to complete an RFP to construct the radio access network in his state. And that's one stipulation with this is if the state opts out, they're only allowed to build the radio access network, which will then connect back to the federal core. The state won't be able to actually own its own core. And the radio access network we have to show that it's interoperable with the nationwide network. And it also has to be approved by the FCC. If the FirstNet and FCC approve the state plan, the states may put in for a grant to construct the radio access network, but the stipulation to that is that grant will be an 80-20 match, so the state will have to come up with 20%. Yes?
And that doesn't cover operations, so that's just capital costs.
Just capital costs.
So it's really
yes, definitely. So looking at it right now from our perspective, of course, with the limited information that we have, we don't see a whole lot of benefit currently to opting out, as we really haven't had any plans as a state to build a LTE network. But as things move forward and as we continue to plan and prepare for it, we'll get a better idea and a better vision of where we want to be.
On an ongoing basis, how do you pay for the operation?
I mean, state expense. Another expense on top of that is we will have to pay FirstNet for connectivity to their core.
Oh, I mean, if you didn't opt out.
If you didn't opt out. If we don't opt out and we opt in with FirstNet, all the operational cost is FirstNet's, not the state's. So that's why looking at the pros and cons of opting in and opting out, right now there really is no big benefit to the state of Utah for opting out currently.
So Kevin, if the governor decides to opt in and they construct FirstNet LTE network, legislature have to start appropriating money to manage that, or does FirstNet manage it?
Managed by FirstNet. So as far as the state's concerned, opting in, there's no cost associated with the operation of the network.
but it's likely, right, that if a national RFP or even regional, top of everybody's here. And isn't it true? Capacity either on towers.
Yes. That's part of legislation that allows FirstNet to go into contracts with commercial carriers. You know, there's a whole lot of speculation out there of how this is going to roll out. The reality of it is $7 billion itself is not enough to build a nationwide network. And so there's a lot of ideas out there of how they're going to accomplish that. And one of them out there is partnerships with commercial carriers and how that's going to play out. Right now, there's a whole lot of questions that we don't have answers to, and we're all kind of waiting patiently for FirstNet to get stood up and get some of these questions answered.
Here's a dumb question. What's the background?
Well, historically, if you look back, this all started back when they allocated 10 megahertz of spectrum to public safety for a data network. Public safety came out and said, you know, that's not enough. We need 20 megahertz or total to do this. There was what they called the D block, which was an additional 10 megahertz, which was next to that public safety spectrum. And there was a big push for years and years for them to allocate that 10 megahertz to public safety. The FCC went to auction that spectrum to commercial carriers, put in a lot of stipulations to that auction that they had to provide priority access to public safety. Nobody met the minimum requirements for the bid, and so it failed. Since then, there's been pushed a lot of debate saying that we need a nationwide network. From a federal level, they recognize that this is the future for public safety communications, with the end goal eventually to merging both voice and data onto this network, the radio data, or the radio traffic and everything onto this one network. I think there's the idea is that if they did this right from the get-go, we could avoid some of the issues we've had with current LMR systems not being interoperable across the country. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that as far as your understanding of.
Well, that's the basic understanding. I want to make one thing clear, just because we have LMR networks we know today are going away. The radio systems police, fire, and EMS use today are not going away, and they're not going to migrate to FirstNet. This is only, my opinion, that so critical. First time ever we have an opportunity from the get-go to build a network that will work across county lines, city borders, state borders. So when you shift massive amounts of people, I mean, this summer was a classic example. You bring all these people in to fight fires, they all bring a different radio system with them and a different data connection. Now it'll be the same. Now it'll be standardized. Hopefully, by doing this on a nationwide basis, we'll get the cost per unit to use it down low enough to where we can afford it.
I mean, this, if I could just add too, I mean, this goes way back, and I think it was really brought to light to Congress's attention in 2011 with the September 11th attacks, and it was a recommendation of the 9/11 committee that this be put in place, and it's taken that long to get to this point.
It's been a long battle, that's for sure.
So UCAN's really in support of all this effort?
Oh, sure.
It doesn't really hinder anything that you're doing now?
No, as a matter of fact, as you read the FirstNet law that puts together this organization, it's pretty close to the UCAN law.
You wrote?
But anyway, this is building a nationwide UCAN type data network that public safety has representation on that board, so it has a management process that helps manage the network long term, and opportunity for public safety with some seat. All that money has to be paid back, and it'll be paid back by user fees. I don't think they're going to end up owning a whole bunch of assets. They'll own some, but the key to success is obviously working with providers out there to
Besides those, the end user radios.
user.
Howard, is that the idea?
Best way to think of FirstNet.
Well, the hardest thing FirstNet's going to have to do is establish the policies and procedures, how independent government process. I hope there are no feds in the room. It's not going to work. It's really got to step out and be independent. Process the feds use today, or it's not going to work. Very quickly so people can touch it, feel it, smell it, and see how it's going to operate. And it's going to, pardon the expression, break a few rules to get operational quickly.
And one thing that may be interesting, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you just give us a few examples of the type of data? You said it's not going to replace these voice things that are currently happening, but just the type of data that would be moving on it?
Public safety
Face
applications.
recognition, wants and warrants, criminal history, building plans for fire. Very behind this is eventually a fire commander on a scene, monitor the location, bodily functions of his firefighters in the building, breathing, heart rates. I mean, it's pretty detailed as what it's going to get to. Also, the ability of somebody to take one of these on the ambulance ride to the hospital, take a picture, help better diagnose the injury of the traveler.
What about 911? What about incoming?
Yeah.
Does this have
The data that could possibly go to a 911 center would be part of that network as well. The text videos that would help in situational awareness for the police and the fire incident commanders would go through the 911 centers too.
There is part of this legislation that provides funding to apps for next generation 911 deployment. And as I think as you move forward with public safety communications in general, next generation 911, broadband, these things are converging, and you're going to see that. And these PSAPs will have this connectivity to this network also. It's going to help connect these responders together. And not only just PSAPs and first responders, but hospitals. There's provisions for secondary users, perhaps utilities, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's a key note, Kevin. Wide-scale emergency situation, water situations, power situations, and all of those have to eventually be a player. Public safety can contact them and deal.
Data by that time will be smart enough so that if it applies to a hospital, the data goes to the hospital. If it applies to a utility provider, it's routed to there. So it.
That speaks to my. Apologies.
The classic example I can give you that happened right here that was a communication phone nightmare was the tornado. Not being worked properly. A lot of cell calls didn't go through. Everybody was trying to dispatch things on disparate networks, and it was just or running messengers between command posts.
Wow.
Kevin, this, I don't know if it'd be for you or for Steve, but how sure ourselves this won't become another utopia type abyss at a federal level?
That's offensive.
I've been reading too many papers.
I'm just saying, things didn't pencil out the way they thought they would.
I think you're wrong on that. I read too many papers.
That was a topic of discussion at a conference we went to with NGA, and the message that we got back from that was everybody needs to support FirstNet. If FirstNet fails, we all fail. And so going forward, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a chance it could fail. Hopefully with good planning, good cooperation, it will succeed. It'll be successful. That's going to be the key, is to make sure that all the states get on board, plan, work with FirstNet, and make it successful. But there's no guarantees.
To add to that, Dean, I think the number one thing is to get a network stood up in operation so people can see it, how it operates. Nobody knows what it's going to be 20 years from now. It's going to be something entirely different than it is now. And I had personal experience with UCAN with that. Told me in 2001, two Olympics were over, that UCAN would be in St. George. I felt that on the floor laughing, and now it's there. So, and this is very similar to that effort. So.
Jessica, do you have time frames as far as, it sounds like lots up in the air, but do you know any kind of basic time frames for?
The last date we have is August 22nd, which is the grant. After that, there's no dates attached. So the next thing is that FirstNet needs to receive an RFP. There's no date attached to that. However, one thing that was interesting during the conference, the forum, at the NGA conference, there was some commercial carrier vice presidents there, and the VP Verizon made a comment that if FirstNet doesn't have something up and operational within 18 months, so kind of put things into perspective. And like you're saying, they need to get something out there, and there's plenty of opportunity for them to do that. There's waiver states and waiver regions out there who already have infrastructure ready to go. Charlotte, North Carolina, Harris County, Texas, that they could utilize those networks to put something in place and to stand up a network, something that's there that they can get working on, and people can see it, they can touch it, they can feel it, they can see the vision. So hopefully sooner than later.
Kevin, will any of the money be earmarked specifically for rural areas, or what's the issue with rurality versus metro networks? There seems to be a lot of service providers. The commercial networks are built out in metro areas to come to Utopia's defense. You know, the metro areas have ample bandwidth, but the rural areas don't. Any issues?
Rural coverage is specified, or is right there in the legislation, that FirstNet needs to provide rural coverage. And I think that's where we can see some huge benefits to speculating that obviously there's not infrastructure out there in some of these areas. And so FirstNet's going to have to build out infrastructure. And this could provide an opportunity for some of the commercial carriers to partner with FirstNet and to provide commercial broadband access to these areas that currently doesn't have coverage. So I think the impact of this is going to go well beyond just public safety.
Federal government have the applications built out already, or are they kind of just developing? Oh, how's that work?
The application side of things, and it's funny because a lot of the forums that we go to, they show these videos of these first responders with these applications with their iPads and everything, and their virtual grabbing things and seeing, look how great this is going to be, everybody interoperable. But the reality of it is this is just a network. This is the foundation. None of those things really exist right now. So obviously the key to really being interoperable is having those interoperable applications. And so I think this is going to be the starting point for that, and it's going to facilitate a lot of these common platforms, common applications for public safety to start using. But there's nothing right now. There's been talks to some agencies in California that are starting to develop applications that will be utilized on this network, but down to the public safety agencies themselves having to come to the table. There's already, standard procedures that have been written, open standards for public safety specifically that are available. Just people haven't really been pushing to develop applications that use these open standards. I help push that and drive that.
Up for RFP, or are they going to just kind of depend on people to build the systems and then?
Probably, yeah. I think it's more of a local process there, not necessarily FirstNet. FirstNet's going to provide the infrastructure and the network, but
as far as the applications, it'll come down to the.
There's a limited amount of U.S. Ignite federal money available for
FirstNet responsible to define these operability standards as part of building the network?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there was a committee that was stood up that Steve Proctor was on that came up with the minimum interoperability standards for the network. They published a document outlining those. And so as FirstNet puts out the RFP and builds the network, it's going to have to follow those minimum technical standards to ensure interoperability.
Oh, I know.
It's good reading.
I'm more than happy to take your word for it. I like to read things that I have a chance of understanding.
So the question is, what are we doing now? As I said, there's a whole lot more questions than there are answers right now, and we're waiting for those answers to the questions that we have to come out. We're not going to see them for a while. Once FirstNet gets stood up and they get organized, they get a business in place, hopefully we'll start getting more answers. Hopefully we'll get maybe a little glimmer of light when they release the grant guidance document on the 22nd. At least we get an idea of where they're heading. We'll see what happens. The SIEC has created a broadband subcommittee to address this issue and to work with FirstNet on this. The committee, what we're charged to do is to assess the current needs of public safety agencies as far as broadband goes. So what are they doing now? How are they achieving broadband communications? What are they using it for? What are their needs? So we can get a better idea of, as a state, where we are now and where we want to be with FirstNet. And also looking at future direction of public safety as far as the use of broadband and what we foresee applications that are out there that we're going to need to utilize over the FirstNet network. We're also charged with creating initiatives to include in our state communications interoperability plan that will address the FirstNet and the broadband issues. And also just to plan and prepare for the network implementation in Utah. Our goal is to have a plan in place to know exactly what our expectations are for this network in Utah. So that way when we do get the plan from FirstNet for the state of Utah, we can sit down and we know exactly where we want to be. We can look at that plan and say, does this meet our minimum requirements? Is this going to take us where we want to go? And if not, then we can go from there and make decisions as far as opting out or renegotiating with FirstNet. Here's the committee membership we have. We try to make it broad and get as much input from urban, rural, different EMS, fire, police, trying to get some commercial carriers involved also, DOT, Bureau of EMS, UCAM. Our next meeting will be on the 30th. After they release the grant guidance, we're going to go ahead and look over that document and put together a game plan with that. That's all I have. Is there any other questions you can answer?
Is the committee looking at this as establishing new infrastructure or just improving?
Well, we're going to probably focus more on current infrastructure. FirstNet's going to want that as they put together their RFP. They're going to want to know what we currently have that they can use. Looking at backhaul, tower sites, all of that. So we're going to put together an inventory of what we have currently that can be available, using also commercial carriers, and then also looking at what the gaps are. So we look and say, this is what we expect coverage-wise. This is what you can provide with the current infrastructure. This is what needs to be added to that to provide the adequate coverage.
What would the process use to gather information on structure of the commercial carriers?
Question. Our experiences in the past is that the commercial carriers haven't been very willing to disclose lots of information to public safety. I know that some agencies have tried. However, I think that mentality is changing. Some of the discussions with the carriers at these different forums we've gone to, they seem to be a lot more willing to participate and to disclose that information. I think that they see this as an opportunity for them also. And So I think they're going to be a lot more willing. How that's going to happen, we don't know. Whether or not they're going to work directly with the states to provide that information, or whether or not they're going to want to work with FirstNet directly, we don't know. And so as we move forward, we'll probably start figuring that out, how we're going to do it. We're trying to reach out to these carriers right now and try to get them involved from the get-go.
And maybe Bert can add a little bit about what our mapping project is doing with commercial service at this point.
Okay. Actually, the thing I wanted to throw out there is that the NDAs that we have with all the providers to submit data to the broadband project cover the kind of consumer maximum available speed data that we put on our interactive maps and basically public is submitted up to the NTC. But they also cover what the NTIA has defined as specifications for last mile and middle mile connectivity points. And I mean, we just really haven't had consistent solid participation with providers on that level. But the NDA that we've got in place allows us to collect that data and keep it as a protected record for use in planning activities without having to make it publicly available to other providers, the public, et cetera. So I mean, that may be one avenue that we look at for umbrella to collect that information under, but I'm sure there are other choices.
Right in place in that.
And you know, the middle mile connecting the backhaul, I think that really gets at the commercial, you know, business and institutional.
That information is going to be really important for us as we move forward to plan.
And I'm throwing up the terms middle mile and last mile, and that has different meanings to different people. That would include tower locations, for example.
Nate, or you can, or somebody wanted to just compile a list of where all that infrastructure was, and back to the carriers and say, I need X amount of bandwidth at all these locations. Great response from everybody bidding on where they want to go. You'll find out who can get to where and what the cost will be. That's sometimes difficult for them to go the commercial route as well.
And to know where you need supplementary coverage, you've got to know where the existing coverage is. So it's
that, you know, I've been in the planning in 3 different carriers in my career, trying to read the crystal ball of where do we build next. I remember competitive snow and Tonopwin, for instance, that, you know, a number of years ago, out to Gunlock and all the capacity in the world was available, but trying to sell internally at the carrier, do we really want to put equipment out there, was a really tough thing. You know, but that kind of activity helps if there's a bona fide RFP that comes back out, or an RFI for handled through Kent Beer's organization probably pretty well.
You're a state representative of an organization, all on the federal level.
On the federal level, they have asked each state to designate a single point of contact that they'll work with for each state. So that point of contact to work with FirstNet. As far as we're hoping Steve was going to be on the FirstNet board, inside, but we're not quite sure how that's going to pan out. But no.
Where do we move?
Yeah.
And who do we lobby? Also, just as a sub question, having our company is, we've constructed networks in Utah for 30 years. The cost to get.
Nothing else? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very good. So if any of you have input for that broadband subcommittee of the SIEC, you can feel free to pass that to me, and I will share that with the committee as I am representing this committee on that committee. Yeah, this council on that committee. Thank you. So just feel free to pass your information or questions or recommendations to me or to Kevin. So our next presentation is from John Harvey with the Public Service Commission.
All right. Do you want to attempt to dare move that?
Yes, I do. I'll move my phone first.
All right. I'm not going to stand up because I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Mainly I wanted to make myself available for questions after giving a little bit of a brief overview of what the Public Service Commission is involved with and what we see as some of the, I guess, important issues that need to be addressed, not so much addressed by the Public Service Commission, but addressed by primarily the legislature and the governor's office. Then we are going to do whatever they tell us to do, but we are being very active in framing those issues, trying to serve as an information resource. So I want to give a little bit of background, a little bit of report on current. There'll be obviously a lot of overlap with some stuff that happened at the Public Utilities and Technologies Committee meeting yesterday. So I apologize for that repetition for those that may have been there, but for those that weren't, this might be helpful in that sense. I would like to take I'll start out by thanking Kevin and Steve, because they basically made my life a lot easier here agenda-wise. Other than that, start out with just a very brief history and a little bit of an explanation of the conundrum that the Public Service Commission finds itself operating in. First of all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with varying degrees of both this federal level efforts to promote what was known as universal service, which was telephone service, as well as the state's efforts to do that locally as well. And those efforts are very long-standing, many decades. At the state level, the most current flavor of that is a law that's passed in 1997, but we've had things prior to that in different approaches and things, and certainly the federal program goes back all the way back to the original Telecommunication Acts and things. So it's a long-standing effort to try and get the nation connected, and it was incredibly successful. Utah achieved rates in excess of 98% of all households having telephone service, and that had all sorts of great public interest benefits, everything from making commerce in communities and governments function better to providing public safety, and you could call 911 and it would go through. You could communicate with people, you keep relationships, all sorts of things like that. Wonderful things. And that was true nationwide. Utah was one of the better states in terms of being connected, but everybody was above the low 90%. So very successful. Then the world changes. And it changes over the course of time with a lot of things, but you can go back as far as saying when the original telephone company was broke up into local and long distance with the antitrust case, and then eventually the local telephone companies begin to face competition, or at least the big RBOCs, direct competition from competitive carriers as a result of the state's 95 Act and the federal's 96 Act. And then you have just technology change. The world since that act has developed very differently than anybody who wrote either of those two laws thought it would. And now what we have is what we call intermodal competition. And consumers are choosing to say we're not as interested in telephones as we used to be, traditional landline telephones. And what we're seeing is the percentage of households that have landline telephones are just dropping every year. Across the board, it's around the country, it's throughout Utah, it's urban, it's rural, and they're going to various wireless or broadband solutions. Myself, I don't have a landline phone. I have a VoIP, probably have a few carriers that are going, and a few others that are going, yeah. Okay. I do it because I'm cheap and it's low cost. But it's a problem for public policy in that we want our societies, the members of our societies, to be connected because it simply makes our societies work better. They work better whether we're talking from a commercial level, a political level, a civic level, family, friendship level. Everything works better if it's easy to communicate with people. So one of the responses to this changing world at the federal level was to say, okay, we're going to switch from worrying about telephones as much to worrying about broadband. And that probably is a pretty good recognition of the way the world's developing, but the difficulty it presents specifically for Utah, and this came out yesterday, is we've done a bang-up job of making broadband available. You can look on our maps from AGRC, and there aren't many people in Utah that at least don't have it available. Now, it may not be as fast as they want. It may be more than they want to pay initially. Maybe that's why they're not adopting as fast as we might like them to. But it's available here. That fund that the feds are creating is to help people who don't have it. We have it. So we're going to be net losers unless there's some really big changes in those federal policies. We're going to be net losers in terms of what happens to the federal money we're getting. And that's just going to be a fact of life. So what we then are stuck with, and this is where our conundrum for the Public Service Commission comes in, is we have to figure out what to do about that hole. And right now we have a legislative policy that says we've got a fund that deals with basic telephone service. Doesn't deal with broadband, doesn't deal with wireless, doesn't deal with cable, doesn't deal with any of that. It deals with basic telephone service. Telephone companies around the state, for obvious reasons, are not building networks designed just to provide basic service. You can build a network to provide basic service at a modest cost. You still have to do a lot of expensive trenching if you're out in rural areas. But it does cost a bit less money to develop a base to deliver a basic telephone call than it does to provide massive bandwidth. I mean, that's just a fact of life. And so we don't have legally at the moment a good way to help this industry utilize the funds that the state has set up to work on keeping people connected, because the way the law currently reads, it's basic telephone service. So that's an issue, and that's been brought up both to the governor's office and through legislative committees to say, you really need to think about this. What do you want us to be doing? Obviously, we can't change laws at the Public Service Commission, but we need to figure out both what do we want to focus on and how much are we willing to pay as a society, because those are the two big issues. And so that's what we've tried to frame the issues as for anyone that asks. And there's a lot of issues to be dealt with. What we've tried to encourage everyone that we've talked to say is get the broadest participation you can in those discussions, because you need to find out what society really needs, and it's going to be more than just one fund focused on one thing. And it may be looking at not only entire companies in terms of revenue base, contribution base, but it may be saying, are there other functions of government that ought to be integrated, rather than looking at things in individual silos. So given how interconnected all these different parts of the problem are becoming, we think the only logical way to really address those problems is to get everybody that could possibly be touched by the issues in the room and get some real consensus as to how the state wants to move forward. So that's kind of our plea. Yesterday we provided some estimates of what we thought the hole might be, and it's going to be in the many millions of dollars, and it's going to get bigger over time. And like we mentioned yesterday, the current taxes that we collect to fund that USF, we don't see any way that that fund wouldn't double. There's already applications in the pipeline at the Public Service Commission for potentially, over $1 million extra above what we're already paying, and that's before most of these reforms get rolled in. So you get all these reforms rolled in, and we would guess that that fund probably would have to double just to do what it currently does.
To still only support voice services.
Probably. So anyway, that's my pessimist, but hoping for some changes and better luck in the future. But now the one caveat, well not caveat, but I guess just other interesting thing to consider in that is this reform order is not a done deal. I mean, it's been issued, it's out there, people are responding, we're making deadlines, but there's a lot of people that are very upset with it. There's a lot of people that think it's illegal. There's a lot of lawsuits that have already been filed. There's obviously the chance that people are upset and only file lawsuits, but they go to Congress and say, hey, just tell them they have to do something different. And we've got an election coming up this fall, and we're going to have a different Congress in place. I don't know how different, but somebody's going to lose. So the world next year might be very different as well. But I think regardless of what happens with all those type of things, we are looking at a fund that currently seems to be pointed in a different direction than the world is now moving. And that ought to be addressed regardless of what happens with the FCC order.
I got a question for you. The I program, we had a chance to sit.
Okay.
Backwards rather than forwards on it. Progress, or is it still the same?
Well, I guess I would be operating on the assumption that a good chunk of that order is going to be implemented unless Congress does something. And the world has changed. Carriers are going to get, eventually almost no inter-carrier compensation. I mean, the FCC obviously wants to go to bill and keep. That's their preference. They're switching stuff from telephone to broadband. That's probably going to happen even if it doesn't happen in this order. I think eventually that has to happen because that's just the way the world's moving. It doesn't really make technical sense to be talking about supporting basic telephone service when every consumer in the country almost wants broadband. So I think we've made some progress in the sense of focusing priorities, but I think we obviously have a lot of serious problems that have been caused in terms of what do we do with people that have loans that they've just that they still have a long time to pay off, and they were counting on something that's not there anymore. I mean, there are a lot of serious issues that it's caused, but I think the overall thrust of it is that it's recognizing the world's different and is responding to that. So I think we've made some progress. It's just painful progress. Anything else? Yes.
Talk about the mobility fund. I think the Connect America Fund is for the first time willing to recognize the need for cellular coverage or subsidies.
Yeah, basically they're saying we're willing to, in order to get broadband out, we're willing to take any type of platform that would work. And so they're still developing some of the actual implementation, but they're talking about everything from reverse auctions where any type of carrier can compete, which is obviously going to open up, primarily wireless is what's added to the mix there. And again, thinking about our current law, what we've got in Utah right now is wherever CenturyLink is, the state will approve competitive carriers in terms of landline competition. Wherever the rural independent carriers are, we currently don't do that very often. The law says that they can if there's a public interest showing, but we've only done a couple. Most of them don't have a landline competitor, but they do face wireless competition, they face VoIP competition, all sorts of things like that. So again, what we would have is a situation where a mobility reverse auction might occur, and this is kind of a worst case scenario. Our local ILEC loses that auction. The Fed support then switches completely to some other carrier, and now the state has a rural ILEC that's providing this essential network in terms of the backbone, in terms of connecting customers, and it's getting no federal support, at least from that particular stream of income. So, the disruptions could be huge. Like I say, they're still writing those kind of rules as determine when that could happen, when it couldn't happen. But it's going to be a very different world in the coming decade. And there are going to be a lot of policy issues that we have to decide where we probably will feel like we don't have a lot of good choices. That's kind of what we're up against there.
John, this is just another out for fodder kind of comment. I had experience sitting on the board of a bank during the financial crisis. The bank is now another bank. It's merged into conservatorship. And lived through that bubble. And with the rural carriers, this may be one of those, a broadband bubble. And it's going to be painful. And I think one of the biggest things that's hard for us to legislate against, or not against, but in favor of or subsidize, is something we call the kitchen table index. You know, if you can't afford beef, you go to pork. Can't do pork, go to chicken, go to fish. You know, you replace, the consumer has choice, and you at home use a VoIP phone. You know, I used to have worked for a great carrier and had great broadband at my home as fast as could be, and now changing roles. That speed has greatly diminished because I don't want to have to write a check for it each week. And I'm probably one of the most technically astute guys in my block, but the kitchen table index said it's time to make a change. So we may see some of that pain, and it's going to be painful. But I think what you'll see is you might see others take advantage of recapitalizing, repurchasing, re-strengthening those other businesses. And as hard as it is, maybe sometimes just standing back and letting the market deal with it might be effective. I hate to say that because a lot of my friends are, you know, in those businesses, but sometimes that's the fastest and easiest way to fix a situation, and the pain lasts for a little while, but you get over it.
Well, and obviously, as the Public Service Commission I mentioned earlier, we do what the legislature and the governor tell us to do.
That's a fodder comment.
But those are the kind of issues that I think that we as a state are going to need to address to say, the world is changing. How do we want to respond to those changes? And I guess my plea is that the broader that discussion can be, in terms of who's at the table, who's talking about it, who's thinking about the consequences, the higher the likelihood is we're going to get an option that has a chance of working for a while.
John, have you had any interest from maybe county commissioners, city, this ongoing issue?
Well, I think indirectly. I mean, what we've had is we've had a lot of the carriers that we regulate, which is a small, well, depending where you're at, it may be a small or a large slice of the universe of people affected by that order. And I think they have made it clear to their local officials just how big of a sea change this might be. So what we tend to hear is we have gotten a few letters and comments from those officials, but we tend to hear from the carriers directly, and we get representations from them of who they've talked to. And so the information is getting out to a very broad set of people out there, certainly. Well, I'm past my stated agenda time here, so if there aren't any other questions, I'll sign off. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, next up, we have our maps of the month. Since we skipped our July meeting, We'll be doing July and August, so.
Which one?
Oh, I would like to introduce you. This is Sean Fernandez with AGRC, for those of you who don't know him. And he manages the cadastral office at AGRC, is that right? Why don't you tell everybody what that is, or tell me what that is?
So everybody hears that word cadastral and they don't really understand what it means. What it means is it has to do anything to do with land parcels and the way that land is divided up. And there are a lot of things that go into that. And our main concern on the state level is we help support the Lieutenant Governor's office because he has a charge to deal with government boundary changes. So anytime that a municipal boundary or a county boundary is modified, that comes to the cadastral group at the AGRC. Properly. But there's a lot more that goes into that. A lot of technology that I want to talk about today is involved with that. So I appreciate what Bert's doing with Broadband and what Christy has done with this project. This project with this map of the month on the Broadband blog has really brought to light one of my pet projects, which is our reference network, which is a GPS network that provides high precision GPS positioning. As urban sprawl heads out into these rural areas, we can see that precision is becoming more and more important. As we try to crunch in a lot of utilities and development into small areas, we need to know exactly where it's at. So GPS has become kind of the standard tool to get precise locations. The land surveying group in our state got together and decided that they wanted to follow the latest technology and try to use what at the time was a GPS network where they could take stationary base stations that could only broadcast a UHF signal about 5 miles from a stationary location to give them the precision they needed, and spread that out into trying to build a statewide network that would give you precisions pretty much anywhere you were in the state. In order to do that, they had to build these stationary mounts on top of buildings that had internet connection. As we started building this out, we found there were a lot of challenges in the rural area. We didn't have a lot of coverage. That was the first challenge because that was just building the network itself. But in order for the network to be used by end users, they had to have a cell phone modem that had a broadband connection hooked to a GPS receiver that would give them a position on the ground and be able to get differential corrections from those base stations. And even though the network's in place, the challenge is, do you have enough broadband coverage where you're trying to get precision? So working together with Christy on this project was pretty good because we could actually overlay where our GPS network coverage was relative to where all these different providers have a solution. So if I can bring up that. Big thing I wanted to bring to light, because one of my challenges as somebody that manages this system is people are always asking me, if I subscribe to the GPS network, where can I survey? And I really didn't have a good way to tell them where they could survey. Obviously, I knew that the whole state was covered with the GPS network, but I didn't know where they'd get broadband coverage for their mobile unit. So this is an example of what the coverage is as a whole with all the providers in the state of Utah. But Christy's actually broken that down across the state. Can you move to the next one? There we go. By provider. So you can see that you have advantages in certain parts of the state using a certain provider over other providers. And it was nice to be able to show this and also to show where the precisions of the network were available. You can see somewhat color-coded with the GPS positions for the reference stations in black dots, and then you've got line work that connects all the dots. The red lines means that you'll get a solution and a fairly decent solution, horizontal precision. If you move into where it's color-coded in yellow and green, your precision is much better because of the densification of the network. But we are limited somewhat on where the providers exist in these areas. But it's much easier for me now to, through these maps, to share with the end users where they can actually get a solution. That's a real huge thing. As we expand the network, our plan is that we would like to see everything on the map is green. But working together with broadband and what you're trying to do, I would like to see all the green areas also be covered with mobile broadband. Because the solution is so necessary for what we're trying to do with surveying, engineering, and construction, and even into agriculture. We have tractors that are actually being driven on this system right now and improving their accuracy so they can save money on fuel and fertilizer costs and several other things. So economically, this system is really an infrastructure backbone that several will use to get high precision accuracy. So I'm glad that you guys are working to get the word out, to work with several others to expand our broadband network. And I think this blog and this map of the month is a great way to get the word out on real-life projects that are using broadband. I didn't want to get into all the nuts and bolts of GPS. We're running out of time. But this is a neat project. So if you get a chance, take a look at the write-up and that's important. I'll leave the rest of the time for Bert to cover his project, and if you have any questions afterwards, let me know.
And all these maps are on the Broadband blog website. You can see all the maps by provider and then a blog post, so there's tons of information about it.
So to give you a little background on what the users are, the user base right now. We have about 75 stations running right now. We've got about 300 people that have a paid subscription. On that, we've developed this through a partnership of people that already had stations in place, so several counties and cities partnered with them, and right now we have probably about 450 users. Growing rapidly. This year we've added, I believe, 8 agriculture tractors on the system. Land surveying is the primary use. If I was to break it down, we probably have 70% of the users are land surveyors or engineers. The rest would be GIS mappers, so people out collecting features, doing feature inventory, that kind of thing. The nice thing about the system is it's set up to give you centimeter precision pretty much wherever you're at. But depending on the device that you're using on the system, you can pay for a survey device that will be like a $20,000 unit that would give you that precision. Or now they're making devices that won't give you quite the precision, something like 4 inches. And more people are kind of moving to that mapping grade unit. A lot more inexpensive. It costs about $3,000 or $4,000 to get to that. Also get units like a cell phone or something more traditional. It is you're getting an autonomous position somewhere in the neighborhood of 60. It's all about improving accuracy and
Thanks, Sean. So this is our August 2012 is Map of the Month is the 5th one that we've done so far. We started out by covering, we're looking at the mobile libraries in the state and how broadband availability lets them bring the internet out to some of the rural outposts in the state and in other places that the coverage is missing. We've looked at mobile wireless service within the national parks as kind of a summer-themed map. We've looked at the FCC Mobility Fund and the areas of the state that are going to be eligible for that and for their relationship to where people live, where the transportation corridors are, and agricultural use. Sean's map was for July. And this August month, we're taking a topic that's been on the board for a little while. We've all been interested in seeing this, I think. And what we're doing, and hopefully you've got a copy of the map here in front of you. What we're doing with this map is we're trying to look at the highest speed within a community that is known to the project. And we've gathered data from providers over the course of the last 2 years. We're looking at that data in terms of what their maximum advertised speeds are, but we're also looking at some of the institutional broadband usage, particularly the schools, the hospitals, government offices that are served by the state network. We're just trying to get a measure of, if you were a business that needed to upgrade your broadband, or you're a business that was looking to relocate someplace in the state, where could you, reasonably expect to get certain speed ranges? So, if you look at the map, we've got lots of dots all over the state. These dots represent the census-designated communities within the state. There are obviously a few more that aren't on here, but they aren't on the census list, and we're going to be working to add those to the map as well in the coming months. The colors represent the highest known speed that we were able to find in that community. So red being very, very fast, on down to purple and black being almost barely qualifying as broadband service according to the national definitions. And then we've got a few gray dots that we do a little bit more research on. So Utah is very well served. We all know that's a reality. But this shows a little bit of the distribution in terms of speed that's available out there, especially in the rural communities. I think there's definitely a pattern to the state. The urban areas are hitting these maximum speeds all over the place. We also know that there are trunk lines going through the state, and the closer you are to one of these trunk lines, probably the higher correlation there is with high capacity broadband. There's also the state network, microwave network hitting down in one that brings some of their speeds up higher than what consumers could expect to get. And the other pattern that jumps out at me is there are a few places where you've got a lot of clusters of black dots and purple dots, where we just haven't been able to find the higher speeds that are typically found in other communities in Utah. Cluster in the center of the state around Miller County, San Juan, a little bit in the northern part of Utah. And I think there's some reasons why these communities haven't yet the higher end of the spectrum. The other thing that's on this map, at the same time, we've got the size of the dots showing what we came up with as an indicator for the challenge of providing broadband services to these particular communities. And that's being scored by two factors, one of which is the population of the community, what's the carrying capacity in terms of number of households and number of consumers. The other factor is the median household income as it relates to the median household income for the state. And on the blog post, we put the detail in terms of how those points were assigned. We actually used a model that the USDA developed and chose to use for their Community Connect Broadband Grant Fund. So the bigger the dot, the higher the perceived challenge of bringing service to these communities based on the factors that the USDA chose for their grant program. You'll see, again, some bigger dots in areas where if you know the state, you kind of expect to see them. San Juan County, the Navajo lands have some big dots. There's some big dots in other isolated areas of the state. Those are the places where, because of the challenge of that market, you maybe expect to find the slower speeds. But the other side of the story is there are some very small markets that are being served extremely well in terms of broadband speed, and that's thanks in part to a number of factors. One of which is the education network, which serves as an anchor tenant for those communities, and there are also, of course, examples of private sector anchor tenants. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that this is kind of a work in progress. This is something that we would like to keep track of over time. We know we don't have it perfect at the moment, but we would like to, going to keep it updated and improve upon it. So if you see anything that you think stands out as something we need to investigate and or correct, we'd like to know about it. And there's a link to my email and the blog post to establish that communication link. Another thing is we'd also like feedback in terms of the presentation. So we've collected a bunch of data, and I should mention that on the blog post you can actually go and open up an online spreadsheet where you can see the values for each of these communities, number of households, the median income, the scores from the USDA market challenge indicators, the maximum speed we've been able to find, and you can sort in the spreadsheet one of these particular columns. So in terms of feedback, we'd like to know, did we get the data right? Do you see anything that's a mistake, has been updated, we need to do it on? And also, what do you think about how we're presenting this? Because I think this at just as much as our state interactive broadband map that's more targeted at a consumer audience, I think this kind of speaks to the state of broadband, the landscape of broadband in the state. And one of the things I forgot to mention is we've done a lot of these maps where we've had kind of a wireless focus. This is wireline focus. So this does not factor in the mobile wireless as of yet, and that's something that I would take feedback on, whether that's important to a single map, whether we should have an additional map that factors in the wireless, whether it should be treated on its own. So that's pretty much what I have. I'm hoping that people will have a chance to take a look at this and reflect on it and get back to us, because it's something I think we would like to continue.
This is very interesting, and I live in downtown Salt Lake, and it's got a red dot there, so where do I sign up for my gigabit?
So what this is doing is it's saying this is the highest known broadband speed within the area, and it includes institutions. So
there's some institution who has a gigabit is what it's saying.
It's saying that there is someone with that capacity within the community, be they an institution. In some cases, it might be residential access that's available to everyone. But I think that
a lot of these dots might be UEN dots, for example.
That's right.
In that data center, probably gets up there.
Where your utopia is, we have residential.
Well, I propose the residential map for one of your future maps.
Well, okay. We can definitely do that. And actually, we actually have that map on our website already, so I can bring that up. But the residential map and also the state interactive map are based on maximum advertised speeds. I feel like we're doing that. We've got some summary maps like this. But this is a second step to take a look at essentially the high capacity that you could reasonably expect to find in that community if you needed it for business or other purposes.
Great. Where can I find your website?
Broadband.utah.gov.
Thank you.
Options that we would suggest for areas where you could also is an institution that's getting a faster speed.
Yeah, no, I understand. So this is, if you were willing to pay for it and you were a big institution, what might you possibly get?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The highest
Well,
capacity.
actually, you don't have to be an institution, it's just I don't think there's a single company here that's going to say you have.
Right.
That's right.
So this is just, I mean, for those who haven't seen this, we presented this at earlier meetings, and this is the the Utah Broadband map, which is oriented at consumer level speeds, and you can click anywhere in the state, and it will tell you the maximum speeds available for consumers, upspeed, upload, download, and it will give you links to those providers and their websites.
Great, thank you.
You can filter that for wireless, wire, or both,
Or a single provider.
or even a single.
So in this case, I've unchecked the wireless tab, and I'm seeing the areas in the state for which providers are reporting wire-based services, DSL, fiber, cable. We can also filter by speed. We can go and look at an individual provider's footprint, all using the data filters within this map. The Map of the Month series is trying to expand upon that and provide some other kind of perspectives on the broadband landscape.
Size of these dots on the map, is there a relation to like the census designation? I noticed there's a mark. Population and income. Well, just population and income.
Yeah, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger.
With the bigger circles being the smaller population.
So you get points in this market challenge measure that we've adopted from USDA. You get points, 4 points for the smaller your community, and you get more points for the lower your household median income is relative to the whole state. So
this is higher need, essentially.
Higher challenge of bringing broadband to that community. For example, Aneth in the lower right corner of the map is scoring 70 points. They're getting points for being a tiny community, plus their median household income is, in this case, less than 50% of the state household income.
You're actually looking at the census.
In this case, it's the census-designated communities, which is it's basically the incorporated cities plus the all but the smallest unincorporated settlements in the state. There's a list of about 320, I think. So there definitely are some very small areas that drop off the census's list as being a designated community. I'd like to get them on this map too. We just have to go to the census block and block level to figure out how many people live there, because it's not as readily available. So a place like Park Valley in the northwest corner of the state, it would be something. You've got people there, there's economic activity, they just haven't met whatever the census is set as a threshold for being a designated community.
Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts before we dismiss the meeting? Great, so our next meeting will be Thursday, October 18th at 10 a.m. in GoEd. In the meantime, we're going to work on establishing the executive committee, so I would remind you to either leave this form with me today or send it to me in an email by September 1st. And I also wanted to note that our December meeting will not be on the third Thursday of the month. It will be on the second Thursday of the month on the 13th. So, thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Wow.
Yeah.
According to the map, I can get a I will go call them up. No, I put it in. I put my address in specifically. And it says at that address. Well, my business is at my address.
Yeah, I mean, all this,
I'm excited. I'm going to give him a call. Well, the reason I'm pushing on it is because when I started USC